I'd like to call this Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting on Tuesday, January 20th to order. At this time, I'd like to identify any potential conflicts of interest from anyone. Seeing none, moving to citizens' comments. Are there any citizens' comments? Seeing no citizens, we'll move on. Item 4, consent agenda, minutes of the January 6th, 2026 meeting, bills and payroll. Do I have a motion to accept?
Move to approve.
A motion and a second. All those in favor, or any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Consideration of items removed. Nothing removed. Discuss a preliminary draft of revised policy number 4.800, procurement of goods and services, presented by Jennifer Zelensky, our finance director.
Good evening. So you've had an opportunity to review the draft of the new procurement policy. You're not seeing a red line version of our current policy, which would be 4.8, procurement of goods and services, and 4.81, engagement of professional services, as this is pretty much a complete rewrite, incorporating some of those items in there, but it would just be one essentially big red line. You'll also note that I'm not requesting approval tonight. I'm looking for feedback that, overall that the policy aligns with your expectations, that it's presented logically and easy to follow, that anything on your mental checklist, to make sure all of those items are also included in this policy. So as we're going along, feel free to stop me if you need some clarity on an item, or we can save them all to the end. This little summary that I'm going to give you should take less than 10 minutes, just so if you want to hold your questions until then. So to begin with, our policy is going to establish a citywide framework to guide departments on how to purchase goods, services, and construction. It's designed to promote responsible stewardship of public funds, ensure fair, transparent, and competitive procurement, maintain compliance with federal, state, and local laws, including 2 CFR 200, which governs federally funded purchases. There are 2 core objectives in the policy. The first being value and efficiency. We want to obtain the lowest cost consistent with quality and performance. And then financial oversight, which ensures adequate controls, approvals, and documentation are in place. The authority on who can purchase, I've kind of described that beginning on page 2. Common Council retains policy-making authority and approves our budget. Under this policy, department heads with the city administrator approval, may purchase goods and services up to $25,000 annually, or purchase professional services up to $50,000 annually. All purchases must be budgeted, follow competitive requirements, and be supported by a properly executed purchase order or contract. Contracts are not binding unless they are signed by authorized officials. Unauthorized purchases may result in disciplinary action or personal liability. Under our roles and responsibilities, which also begin on page 2, some key responsibilities are that the mayor signs all contracts unless otherwise authorized by council through ordinance or resolution. That's a statutory requirement. The city administrator ensures operational compliance with our policy. City clerk maintains records and attests to contracts. That's also statutory required. The Director of Finance confirms that funding is available and countersigns contracts. Again, responsibilities defined in statutes. Department heads are responsible for ensuring that the purchases meet their department's needs. They verify invoices and receipts. They stay within their approved budgets. They submit required documentation and rebates, and do not sign contracts unless they are expressly authorized. This could occur through resolution of council, for example, in grant documents. Boards and commissions retain authority where required by statute. So there is, I'll read this piece directly from the policy. The policy applies to all purchases of all departments of the city except except to the extent that Fire and Police Commission, the Utility Commission, or the Library Board by direct action approves a procurement policy distinct from this one. So it means it applies to everybody unless those particular boards and commissions have approved their own policies. On page 3, I've outlined some ethical standards. The first being that there should be no purchase splitting to avoid thresholds. So if we reasonably expect over the course of a year that a good or service will meet that threshold, even if you purchase them individually monthly in the aggregate, they should be considered as one procurement. No one is to accept gifts or gratuities except minor items like $20 or less, where it would be awkward not to. There should be no conflicts of interest, either real or perceived conflicts of interest. Vendors must not be delinquent or debarred, and we must maintain strict confidentiality during the procurement process, but that has to be balanced with Wisconsin's open records law. These standards protect the city from risk and preserve the public trust. A brief review of the purchase types and thresholds begins on page 4. But if you want to refer to the handout that I provided to those present, or on page 8 of the draft in the packet, there's a grid that gives the summary of procurement requirements, which is basically about the next 10 pages of the policy. So if we're going through the policy, general purchases under $10,000 would just require the department head's approval, no bidding required. Now, I should make the note that other than public construction, which is very clearly defined in Wisconsin statutes, council can decide how we let any other type of contract. So in whatever manner it approves. So all of these things other than those specific to public construction are up for you to determine. I've offered some guidelines as a starting point for discussion. So if you're not comfortable with those or you want to see some edits, please feel free to bring those up. If we are engaged in general purchases between $10,000 and $25,000, 3 written quotes are required. The department head, administrator, and finance director are the required approvals. Once we get to the $25,000 to $50,000 threshold for general purchases, quotes are required, and it also requires the board, committee, and council approval. Over $50,000, that competitive process now should include a sealed bid to be opened according to as directed in the RFQ or RFP that has been issued. Board and council approvals are required. When we move into professional services, competitive RFP processes are always encouraged. Anything under $50,000 and suggested administrative approval. Anything over would require a board and council approval. Some types of services that this policy suggests to be exempt would be legal counsel, insurance, municipal advisors for debt issuances. Public construction, this is an area that's very well defined within statutes. Anything under $5,000, no bidding is required. $5,000 to $25,000 quotes are required, and a Class 1 notice also must be advertised. Anything over $25,000 now needs a sealed bid and a Class 2 notice and must be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder. If we are procuring lands, buildings, and utilities, there's it always is going to require council approval, except that utility work provided by city staff can be exempt from bidding. So this would be the streets department performing work for wastewater, or Marshfield Utilities electrical department performing some work on a construction project. Sole source procurement may be permitted only under very defined and unusual circumstances, such as emergencies. If the procurement relates to a grant, if the grantor has approved a sole source procurement, it has a unique compatibility, or it can also be allowed in intergovernmental purchases. All approvals and documentation requirements would still apply. And one thing that I didn't expressly state in this policy is that anytime sole source is used, that we would require written documentation that explains why that department thinks there's only one vendor, if the cost is reasonable, what is very unique about that one specific vendor that no one else can reasonably offer. So that would be something that I would be looking to add in the next draft of this policy. So some key takeaways that I hope this policy accomplishes is that we have established clear authority and accountability. It aligns with legal requirements. City attorney has given a run through of the policy. It strengthens our financial oversight and transparency to the public, and it protects the city from risk, fraud, and audit findings. And it ensures that council involvement is held at appropriate levels. So hopefully everything is very clear and well outlined, but should you have any questions or comments, suggested edits, I'm happy to listen to those now.
Any questions for Jennifer? Mike?
Thank you. And thank you, Jennifer. This is a huge step forward, so appreciate it. Couple questions under professional services. I mentioned insurance on that. Why would we include that when that could be a competitive bid?
I think that when we went through the process, we found that it wasn't necessarily competitive. Again, it's a suggestion. If you, want to maybe suggest a time frame for how often, if you want insurance to be bid. I mean, it's not something I would necessarily want to do on an annual basis. It's a very big time commitment. But if you think a reasonable 20, 50 years, kidding, kidding there, is appropriate, I'd be happy to.
I think and I would kind of leave it up to you. You know the process more than I would, but I think a check and balance system is important somewhere along the lines, because, I mean, they showed us last time they are being competitive. So that's a comforting level, but I think not just for the council and stuff, but for the community to see they're doing their checks and balances. I think that's important. On another note, I was just curious, I know there had been some discussion a while back about I'd like to see something in this procurement policy which focuses on letting our community know if there are things, whether it's a service or and whatever it might be, because buying local is huge, and I think we should support that strongly. So I don't know what that looks like, if it's maybe something just on the website, or if it's something that communications can maybe.
We're currently dabbling there.
Okay.
I think some folks, and maybe Steve has more.
Yeah, I mean, going back to something that was brought up to us, I mean, early last fall, we are regularly now putting all the RFPs, bids, quotes, RFQs out there on the web. Whether everybody knows that or not, maybe we need to advertise it better. But every time we go out for anything like that, we put it on the web very prominently. Maybe it's a matter, like I said, of PR.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. I know in my business, we would check municipalities for RFQs out there, but it's a cumbersome, time-consuming process. So, I mean, if there's just a way that you can get scuttlebutt going community-wide, any kind of, I just think that's important, and keeps money local, which is also a big factor. So.
Yeah, we definitely want local vendors to have a chance. I mean, if they don't make it in terms of how they compare, so be it, but that they ought to know and have an opportunity to bid.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you. That was all I had at this time.
Okay. Rebecca?
I just have a couple of just kind of clarifying questions for me. This is also under professional services, and it's kind of ironic that today I got asked by a citizen about our health insurance broker. It looked like we had a broker in Milwaukee and then chose a new broker also in Milwaukee, and the project being Security Health. And we have a couple of local people who provide, you know, Security Health or their insurance companies, if that's what they deal in. And I do notice it says note the procurement of legal counsel, insurance brokers or carriers, and municipal advisors for debt issuance is specifically excluded from this policy. Why would that be? And can you answer quickly, like, how did we decide who our insurance carrier or who our broker was going to be for our insurance?
We did actually issue an RFQ for brokerage services about 2 years ago. So we did that. We'll be doing that again soon. So once that process, you know, commences, we'll put that notice out on the website where local providers could actually, you know, participate in that.
Okay, but in follow-up, why do we have it down as that they're excluded from the policy? Is there a specific reason for that?
For health insurance brokers or insurance in general, Rebecca?
Well, it just says I think it just says in general.
Yeah, it does.
Because
Because I had put that in there because we had just gone out for quotes on all of our main policies, except I guess I wasn't, when I went out for bid, I didn't do the health insurance. That was done through HR. So it was a very time consuming. I didn't feel that all of our local providers were competitive. It's okay if you have a different opinion. And I think, you know, Mike had asked that, and I had suggested to put in a time frame for that. And City Administrator Barg has suggested 5 years for insurance as a reasonable time that we could strike that from the policy and go out for quotes on insurance every 5 years.
I think the main thing,
okay.
go ahead, Rebecca.
I was going to just clarify. I'm just trying to clarify this in my head, and I only gave that as an example of the insurance because it got brought up to me today, actually. But I was just trying to see why, on a policy that we're going to put into place forever, why those are excluded from the policy. And there's probably a legitimate reason. I just can't. My brain can't compute it right now.
I think it's probably because we use the League of Wisconsin Municipalities as our insurance carrier. They're designed to service municipalities. Some of the nuances of their policies are not offered by every insurance carrier. So that was why I had excluded them, but I'm willing to go out and go through that process if council doesn't think that that's a viable justification.
What I was going to say before is I think there may be certain types of services that maybe are more internal to staff, only in the sense, not that we're trying to keep council at bay, but for example, you expect us to provide good financial advice for us to make decisions at your meetings, finance, budget, and personnel and council. And a few years ago, we thought that the provider we were using as our financial advisor was not doing a good job, and staff went out and solicited Ellers. And I think, you expect us to bring you good recommendations, and Ellers has helped us. If we come to a point in a couple of years from now where it seems like Ellers is not doing a very good job, I think staff is probably going to want to lead the charge and say, we need help in terms of being able to provide the council with better advice. So that's kind of why I'm thinking, now, this is not an attempt to exclude local vendors, and I think you're pointing that out well. If there's vendors of these services that are local, I definitely want to include them. But oftentimes we're talking about people in Madison, Milwaukee, and other places. Which one is the best to advise staff and how to recommend to council? That's probably why we've looked at some of these in that venue.
Okay, yeah, that makes it a little bit clearer, especially I think when you said some of these services are obtained through the league, and I get all that. I just was trying to compute that into my head, and I really don't have a suggestion one way or another. I just thought that I needed to ask that question.
Brian?
When you Just going to follow up with Rebecca and Mike's comments there. When you look at the insurance, especially for a city municipality, unless it's going to go haywire, unless it's going to go, like the increase is going to be double digits or 20% or so, it is a long process. It takes 2 months to put quotes together for every vehicle we have here, every building we have here, it takes a very long time. So by the time that city staff is going to get our renewal from the League of Municipalities, we're only going to have 2 or 3 weeks before we have to finalize the budget. And they're never going to have that put together. So, I mean, as long as the insurance keeps pretty steady, it's a good thing to review it at like a 5-year mark and say, okay, we have went up, 25% within the last 5 years. Maybe we send out an RFQ for that, but you got to send that out in September. And you got to base that on last year's number. You don't even know what you're going to have for this year's numbers until the end of October, maybe the beginning of November for your 1/1 dates. So it's very tough for that specific industry. So it's just my 2 cents because I work there.
Any other questions or comments for Jennifer? Thank you, Jennifer. Moving on to item 7, suggested items for future agendas. Anyone have anything for future agendas? Seeing none, motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those
Aye.
opposed, nay. Meeting adjourned.